Hello and welcome back. You're looking at Rickard Rakell, and him and Bryan Rust are two of the hottest pickups in fantasy right now. Both are 35% owned, but Rakell, 3 goals, 3 assists, 6 points, 3 power play points, 11 shots, 5 blocks in just his last 3 games. And to top it all off, he is 3-position eligible with some hits volume as well. Incredibly complete, he's a must-own at this point. Bryan Rust also picked up the hat trick the other night in Montreal. 4 goals, 3 assists, 7 points, 1 power play point, and 10 shots in his last 3 games. And as long as he's healthy, he is a valuable fantasy player for you. So just wanted to highlight these two off the top, as they are two of the hottest players in fantasy right now, and both of them are 35% owned. But they have a 3-game week this week, and they had a 3-game week last week. So there are several teams this week with a nice 4-game schedule. And as we'll always do, we'll look at the schedule right now to take a look at some guys that you can add for week 11. So let's jump right into the schedule. And right off the bat, there's 51 games this week and a pretty nice split. So the only really light night game is Monday with only 3 games. Wednesday's got 5, Friday with 7, and Sunday with 6. So there is a bunch of potential options for you on these, what would typically be light nights. Now, we have 8 teams that have a 4-game week. You're looking at them here: Florida, Vancouver, Colorado, Edmonton, Washington, LA, Seattle, and Ottawa. And I've kind of ordered them in terms of their best schedule to worst as we look downward. Florida with the perfect Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. Now, this doesn't count these as light nights because this has 7, this has 6, so they're not technically light, but they're basically light. Edmonton, Minnesota's a tough game there. St. Louis is better since the coaching change, and then a difficult game against Tampa Bay in Tampa Bay, but at least not a lot of travel there. 3 road games, so that is a little bit more difficult, but there's not a ton of guys you can grab off of Florida. We'll get into that in the next section, but not a ton of guys because a lot of their offense comes from the big boys. Now, Vancouver, there are some options. They have this mid-game or midweek back-to-back at Utah, at Vegas, and then the 2 home games against Colorado and Ottawa. You have Colorado, who, again, they play Vancouver here. They've got San Jose, which is a winnable game for sure. They've got Anaheim, which should be a winnable game, and this will be a good matchup, a former playoff matchup. Obviously, Seattle took down the Colorado Avalanche in previous years in the playoffs, so that's going to be interesting on Sunday. Edmonton with a nice Monday game and then a little bit of a break, and then they play 3 and 4 to round out the back half of the week, and all of these games are at home, so that is nice. And they get San Jose in there, and Ottawa, and Boston. These should all be winnable games for Edmonton, but again, kind of the same thing as Florida. They don't have a lot of options on the waiver wire. Washington, the front-loaded back-to-back with travel on the road, and then Carolina and LA, so a very difficult matchup for these Washington Capitals. But with that said, Washington's been a very good team, and they should be getting Alex Ovechkin back at some point during this week. LA, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday is not ideal. 4 road games, not ideal. Couple of winnable matchups, though. Nashville, Philly, and Pittsburgh should be winnable games for LA. This Caps game, the second night of a back-to-back, should be a little bit more tough for them. Seattle, same breakdown. All of these teams with the same breakdown: Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday. A little bit of an easier midweek matchup for Seattle against Ottawa and Chicago, but then the road back-to-back on the weekend is going to be tough for them. And then with Ottawa, you've got Seattle, Calgary, and then this is basically a West Coast road trip, which is always difficult on those East Coast teams, so that's why they're down at the bottom. You have 2 teams with 2-game weeks, Vegas and the Islanders. So, not a lot of you out there own a lot of Islanders, but if you own Dobson, if you own Jack Eichel or Barbashev or any of those guys, you're probably going to want to grab somebody off the waiver wire. So let's do what we normally do when we have this many teams playing 4-game weeks. We're going to aggregate everything and look at the player hub instead of looking at these teams individually. As we look at the player hub, you'll notice that it has gotten a facelift. I've also added some shooting percentage metrics here, last 2 weeks stats, and this is the hot or not trending list. This is more based on how they've increased or decreased their combined rating over the last 2 weeks. But with that said, you also have this last 2 weeks stats pack here that you can look at and see who's actually really hot. So we'll go through this. This is pre-selected to just the teams that have 4-game weeks, and there's a theme here. And that theme is there's a lot of Seattle Kraken on here. Now, I could have given them their own slide, but I did want to mention this and show you the new player hub. So with that said, Shane Wright might be your best ad this week. He's only 11% owned, and he's one of the hottest players that is available right now. 11% center right wing dual eligible, third line center, but getting second line power play. He's got 3 goals, 3 assists, 6 points in his last 2 weeks, last 6 games. So that's a point per game pace, and he's been picking it up lately. So you can see here the power play numbers have come up a bit. Shot volume is very, very low, and that means that his shooting percentage is very, very high at almost 27%. That is relatively unsustainable. So that is a word of caution if you're trying to grab him and ride this hot streak. You should be able to ride it for a little bit, but as soon as his shooting percentage starts to come down, he will become less ownable in fantasy. So keep that in mind. His goal totals have been good, 79th percentile there, and you can see him trending up. But even with that, he's only a 36, 37 in the combined rating, and basically this cuts off at a 35. So he just barely made this list because of the fact that he's been shooting so low and not hitting at all. So keep that in mind if you're looking for Shane Wright. You also have his line mate. So there's 3 players on that line that are playing really well. Eeli Tolvanen is one of the others. He's 8% owned. Dual position winger, left wing, right wing. He's also line 3, power play 2, just like Shane Wright. 6 points in his last 6, 2 goals, 4 assists. And he's, one of those guys that's going to get you some hits. So that's a nice peripheral floor if you're in a points league or in a categories league where you want to stuff that category. 2.55 hits per game, 91st percentile there. Goal totals are pretty decent, and he's usually good for that. Goals and hits have been his specialty over his career. 8 goals on the year is not the crazy highest amount that you'll see, but his shooting percentage isn't overly high. It's in that range for goal scorers. So just to look at some of these, you can see in the explainer down below, that ideal range is essentially the low end and the upper end for guys who are between 20 and 50 goal scorers. So if you want a guy who's going to be a really consistent goal scorer for you, that seems to be the shooting percentage range that you want them to be in. Anything higher than that is risky. Anything lower than that, and they are probably underperforming goal-wise. So keep that in mind as you're looking at Tolvanen, but at least you'll get those hits. 2.55 is really nice for a forward. Now, on this line, you also have Bjorkstrand, and he might be the hottest of the entire bunch and the most ownable. He has a little bit higher ownership percentage, but he's at 19%. Single position right winger is a little bit less ideal, but with that said, his numbers are a lot better than some of the other 2 guys. The hits are still kind of there in terms of 1 hit per game, but you're getting really good production over the last 6 games. 8 points, 5 goals, 3 assists in the last 6. So you can see him trending up massively over the past couple of weeks, and it's been going a little bit longer than just that last 6 game sample size. So if we go back a little bit further, 7 goals, 7 assists, 14 points, and 4 power play points in just his last 11 games. So he's been hot for at least a month now. You can see here going back to the 22nd of November, that's where this started to climb, and he's gone basically 10 points up in the right direction since that point. He is a goal scorer, so 89th percentile in terms of his goal pace, 11 goals, 11 assists, a nice even split there on the year, 22 points in 30 games, 5 power play points on the year, and as I just mentioned, 4 of those in the last 11 games, so that's worth noting as well. Again, 19% owned. He might be your best add just in terms of offensive production. Now, he's not necessarily getting the best line assignment, so you also have Matty Beniers, who's, I believe, their first line center right now. They've got Chandler Stevenson as their second line center, and we'll get to him in just a second as he's down here on this list. Now, Beniers' shooting percentage is a little bit low at 7.1%. 4 goals on the year would also track with that. 17 points in 31, so he's just a bit over half a point per game. The assist numbers are pretty good, 84th percentile there. Not elite level in anything else here, but he's been pretty consistent in this range. So with that said, he's 11% owned, single position center. But as I just mentioned, you also have Chandler Stevenson here, who is line 2 and I believe power play 1. He is only 7% owned, so he's even more ownable, single position center, just like Beniers. 2 goals, 6 assists, 8 points in his last 7 games, 5 power play points in that span. So he has been red hot on the power play, 94th percentile there. Assist numbers are really good, 93rd percentile there. So if you're in a points league that weighs power play assists at all a little bit more heavily than some of the other metrics, this would be a guy to go pick up. The shot volume, the hits, and the blocks are all very disappointing. Really terrible shot volume at under 1 shot per game, which is crazy that his shooting percentage is 10.7. I would expect it to be lower with even fewer goals just based on the lack of shot volume that he's been putting up. But There's a number of guys from this team that are available. Nobody seems to want Kraken because they spread out their scoring, so just kind of wanted to highlight a bunch of them. There is one other guy that you can also add if you want hits. As we mentioned, Tolvanen gets hits, but so too does Brandon Tanev. And he also gets some blocks, 2.19 hits, 1.65 blocks per game. And in his last 6 games, 2 goals, 2 assists, 4 points. If you take that a little bit further back, in the last 17 games, which is a relatively large sample size, 6 goals, 6 assists, 12 points. He had a stretch in there, 4 games where he didn't put up any points. But basically without that little stretch, he's been really consistent offensively for at least a little bit, basically back here, 11-9. That was when this started to trend up for him. So you're getting him for the peripheral floor, the hits and blocks. The shot volume is better than a guy like Chandler Stevenson. The goal totals are pretty decent for a guy who's usually 3rd or 4th line. Currently, he's on line 3. So a number of guys you can get from Seattle. But in terms of hits, there is another option here available. Tanner Jeannot, who's currently playing right now. The Kings are playing the Rangers right now. As I'm recording this, they're up 3-0. We'll get to one of those developments in just a second, but Jeannot has an assist today. So with that said, this is 2 points and 4, but it's 3 points and 5 now, including that assist. He's only 8% owned, dual position, left wing, right wing, and 3.08 hits per game is his main feature here. He also used to be a goal scorer at one point in his career, put up 24 goals a couple years ago with Nashville, but it hasn't worked since then. So if he can start to get some offensive production going, he's got an average shooting percentage. So hopefully he starts to shoot more, and that will result in a couple more goals. But obviously, these numbers are all very unownable in terms of power play. He doesn't get any power play points. Shots are low. Assists are low. Overall points are low. And the Kings just made it 4-0. So this is a rout right now. As a Rangers fan, I'm obviously very disappointed about that. But with that said, in this game today, a guy who I might have to scroll down here to find is Warren Foegele. Also playing today, also scored today, 3% owned, left wing, right wing dual eligible, a goal and 5 shots in just the first period alone. So that is pretty crazy for Foegele. He's currently, I believe, playing line 3 with Byfield, if I'm not mistaken. So decent line assignment in terms of the guys he's playing with. Byfield getting some power play one time, but Foegele is not, obviously. So his power play numbers are, 0, non-existent. Hits and blocks aren't great. Shot volume is much better than some of the other guys we've seen so far in this segment. 87th percentile, 2.38 shots per game is pretty good. And the goals are not bad either. So 7 goals in 29 games, 78th percentile there. He's only 3% owned, so he should be there for you in pretty much any league size. So that is something to take note of if you're looking for an LA King. Now, one of the themes with this is there's not a lot of players on these good teams that are available. So there's a lot of guys here that we've talked about that are kind of lower ownership, that are a little bit less, valuable in terms of the teams that they play on. So one of the teams that has a perfect schedule this week is Florida, but obviously guys like Barkov, Forsling, these guys are going to be owned up completely. I did happen to pick up Forsling in one league somehow, but that was kind of, crazy that he was still available on the waiver wire. With that said, the only guy that you could potentially get from the Florida Panthers would be Evan Rodriguez, 5% owned, center left wing dual eligible, 2 goals, 3 assists, 5 points in his last 8 games. Line 2 with Bennett and Tkachuk. So I don't know if you saw this right at the beginning, but Matthew Tkachuk up here, the hottest player in the league, arguably, 11 points in his last 5 games, skyrocketing up basically from the beginning of December. As soon as December turned the calendar over, he started to light it up. And you're getting that exposure through Evan Rodriguez, who's only 5% owned and is dual eligible. So not the best file, obviously, not anywhere near the same level of production as Matthew Tkachuk, but he's getting that line assignment, and he's been a reasonable waiver wire pickup over the past couple seasons. So that's most of the ads that you have this week, at least in terms of forwards. There's 2D that were on this list that we could talk about briefly. Very low ownership guys. You have Joel Edmondson at 1% owned. He's got 2 points in his last 4. Mainly getting him for blocks, 88th percentile there. Hits are decent at 1.7, but not a lot of offensive production in general. 9 points in 27 is not terrible for a defensive defenseman like him, and he was as high as a 50 earlier, so he does have some room to grow from where he is now. And then we also have, if I can find him here, Calvin DeHaan. Again, this is not necessarily the best file in terms of offensive production. No goals on the year, no power play production. He is a third pairing defenseman, but he is getting some blocks, 89th percentile, 1.67 blocks per game, 1.3 hits per game, and he does have 5 assists in his last 6 games. So 0% ownership for Calvin DeHaan, so he probably would be available for you. But again, not a whole lot of other guys that are available. Darnell Nurse is playing pretty well. Forsling playing well. Morrissey obviously owned up, so not a ton of defensemen that you can add this week, but just wanted to go over a couple here because it has been very forward heavy. But this is a look at some of the hotter guys in the league from these teams that have 4-game weeks. Up next, we're going to take a look at the goaltending because, boy, a lot has changed in the last couple of weeks. Now, we have a lot to talk about in terms of goaltending, a bunch of guys changing teams, and we'll start it off by looking at Mackenzie Blackwood, whose rating has skyrocketed just because of this metric right here. Team D was at 4th percentile with San Jose. Now it's climbed up 60% to 64th. That obviously makes him a little bit more valuable in fantasy. He was scooped up literally the minute that he got traded in my league, so I'm sure a lot of people out there went and did that. He's 54% owned. He's got 2 wins in his last 4 games, 2.48 goals against, which should come down, and a .937 save percentage, and that was with San Jose. So this is still, I don't think we've seen him in a game yet. In terms of playing with Colorado, he came over and was sick or something happened, but with that said, his file has definitely increased. You may not be able to get him, but who you could potentially get is the other goaltender coming over to Colorado, and that is Scott Wedgwood, and he has skyrocketed. And again, this is basically from when he got traded, but even before that, he was trending in the right direction. So the team defense coming up, overall on the year, not bad with a .904 save percentage, but in his last 5 games, 3 wins, 192 goals against, .931 save percentage, and a shutout in that span, and that shutout coming with Colorado. So if there is any kind of question mark about Blackwood, now he does have injury history, Blackwood does. With that said, Wedgwood would be a nice little 1B option that could potentially elevate into that number 1 role given some circumstances with Blackwood. So at 37% ownership, he might be the better option. He probably is for the short term. They do have a back-to-back this week, so that will factor in. Both of these guys should see some time this week. But with all of that said, the guy going the other way, and I have to find him on the fly here because a lot has changed with his file. Justus Annunen. You can see him at the beginning of the year. He was kind of okay, a lot better than Georgiev at the start of the year, and then it just kind of fell off a cliff, and he dropped from a 74 to a 35, and that's why he ultimately got traded. That's why Colorado ended up trading both of their goaltenders. Annunen only 7% owned, but he did win his first start with Nashville, 35 saves on 36 shots, .972 save percentage, and again, only 7% owned. So obviously Saros is the goaltender in Nashville. Annunen will probably not start all that often. Maybe he'll get, he's got 13 games on the season. Maybe he'll hit 30 if he's lucky, 25. You're looking at maybe 12 to 15 starts from here on out. They do like to ride Saros a lot, so maybe not the best option if you're looking for a reasonable 1B option, but anytime that he's starting, Nashville is actually, this does reflect poorly on them in terms of team defense, but they just struggle to score, so they're constantly hemmed in their own end, but it can't really get much worse for Nashville, and they did bring over Annunen, who is a little bit younger than Wedgwood and could potentially grow into a backup role with them. Now, with all that said, Georgiev, we're not really going to touch on Georgiev because pretty much he should be garbage at this point. The team defense is atrocious, down at 9th percentile, well below expected, one of the worst in the NHL, if not the worst goaltender in this metric in the NHL. Save percentage is unownable. Goals against is only going to get worse. The shot volume is going to be pretty high, and the total save volume might be there. So that's the only redeeming factor for Georgiev. He might have hit your waiver wire at this point, but definitely not worth a stream. If you're looking for a starting goaltender, we do have to touch on Tristan Jarry. I mentioned him previously, 21% owned. He's got 5 wins in his last 6 starts. The numbers aren't great, 3.21 goals against, 896 save percentage, but that is slightly better than his season-long average. And again, 5 wins in his last 6 starts. So if you're in a points league that gets waiting for wins, this is an opportunity to go grab a starter for a team that obviously is not the best defensively. He is well below expected. And these raw metrics are pretty terrible thus far, but he's been much better since coming back from that assignment to Wilkes-Barre. So if you need a starter, he could be available for you, 21% ownership. But as I mentioned in previous weeks, one of the better starters that you can still potentially get, and I have to find him on the fly, which is always difficult, that is Karel Vejmelka. So Vejmelka we've touched on before. He's been getting a ton of start volume for Utah in the absence of Connor Ingram. He's 96th percentile in terms of goals saved above expected. The wins are still kind of not there. So he has been playing pretty well. He's only got 2 wins in his last 4 starts, but a 2.23 goals against and a .917 save percentage. So these numbers are still good. He is well above expected. Total save volume is decent and definitely ownable. He's just not getting you the wins. So kind of the opposite of Tristan Jarry. If you're in a points league that weighs those wins and you need those, maybe go out and grab Jarry. If you need these raw metrics, if you're in a categories league that takes save percentage and goals against into account, Vejmelka might be the better option, as he's going to get a bunch of starts and he gets pretty good save percentage and goals against every time he's in the net. He's 25% owned. So both of these guys in the same ownership range, and of the two, Vejmelka has been better in terms of what he's doing, but Jarry has been winning some games, which is definitely worth noting. Now, with all of that said, there is one other guy, the current backup for Vejmelka, and that is Jackson Stauber. He only has 2 starts on the season, and again, I have to find him on the fly, but he did win both of those starts and had a shutout to boot. So Stauber over here doesn't have a file here because he wasn't with Utah at the beginning of the year, and that's how some of this data is prepared. But with that said, 5% owned, 2 wins in the 2 starts that he has this year, 1 goal against, .962 save percentage, and a shutout. So he is, if he's going to get in at all, he would be worth a start. Utah is getting slightly better defensively, but they at least will give their goaltenders some run support. They're not a terrible team. Kind of like some of these other guys that we've looked at. Pittsburgh is not a team that I would like to pick a goaltender from, but with that said, Jarry has been better. Utah would be a little bit of a better team exposure to find a goaltender, and that is why I'm mentioning both Vejmelka and Stauber here, because both of them are available. Last guy I just wanted to touch on really quickly is a guy coming back off of injury, Darcy Kuemper. He is 62% owned, but that is a little bit low for a guy who should be the LA starter. 97th percentile team defense is the main reason you would own him. He also gets pretty good goals against because of that team defense. So 2.4 goals against, .907 save percentage on the season. 3 wins in his last 3 starts, including today, where he's definitely going to beat the Rangers. 1 goal against in each game, .954 save percentage if you factor that in. So basically, since he's come back from injury, he's been excellent. That sucks for me because I held on to Rittich and wasn't able to get Kuemper. And so this is a team defense that you're going to want exposure to. If for whatever reason Kuemper goes back out, Rittich is still a good option. But with Kuemper back, he should be getting the bulk of the starts, and he has been relatively consistent this season compared to last year at least. That's going to do it for the goaltending. That's going to do it for the video. Let me know what you're thinking as we head into the end of December. I know a lot of you guys out there have been wondering about trade targets and guys that you could potentially go after for playoff exposure in your leagues. Maybe we'll do a video on that in the upcoming days and weeks. But hopefully you guys are all relatively well set in your playoff positions at this point, and you're cruising your way towards the playoffs. That's going to do it for this one. Thanks for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.